All right.
Go for it, Aaron.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Happy 2016. We're happy you joined us. Um, let's see. As you probably already know, the PowerPoint is up on the screen, and our topic today will be measurement predictions that Katie has for 2016. And a new edition of the Measurement Advisor went out on Monday. So I'm sure you guys saw a lot of the articles and had questions and comments. So during the second half of Measurement Hour, we will turn the reins over to you so you can ask Katie or any of the other attendees questions or comments or bounce ideas. And that'll come in the second half, like I said. And without further ado, let me introduce Katie Paine.
Hi, guys. So this is going to be a little different. For those of you from the Air Force, I don't think you've been on the Measurement Hour before. Normally we take a particular sort of tutorial topic. This time I thought we would just do really sort of go through what's going forward, because I get, oh dear, what happened there? There we go. My predictions, because I think it is an interesting time, and I know some of the questions that I've already gotten ahead of time have been about what do I do about it. That'll be kind of the second half of the presentation, and I'm not sure it's even in half because we don't have very many slides today. But you know, the year is it's going to be an interesting one. Can everybody see my first slide there that says factors that will drive our industry?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So the one thing that I don't think anybody's used to thinking about is the talent war. Actually, some of this came from my meeting at the Air Force with Sean Minogue and those folks about recruitment and the issues there. But that was followed immediately by a discussion at Southwest Airlines and a number of other clients of mine where everybody's starting to look for people, and not just data geeks and you know, and data analysts and IT people. People are looking for PR people with, you know, with data backgrounds, and they're looking down lower in the ranks now. It used to be that, you know, the talent wars were all the way up at the top. They're now drifting down. What that means is that increasingly these organizations are going to be devoting money and effort, energy to recruitment, and particularly using social media for recruitment, paying attention to Glassdoor and reviews, paying attention to what people are saying about you as an employer, not just as a promoter of stuff or a supplier or whatever. And so we're already seeing budget dollars shifting to internal and culture and reputation. I have one client who is doing the biggest, boldest event of their entire history in America next summer, entirely just to boost relationships with its female employees. I can't really talk about it, but it is an amazing thing that they're doing, and very, very costly. And it is, and I, you know, was been called in to measure it. Well, the measurement is, you know, are you more likely to stay with the company? That's the only measure. Is, are you more likely to, you know, engage and you know, and grow with the company and stay here? And, you know, it makes my job easier in terms of simple metrics, but it was very interesting because it's all about what do employees think about the organization. And I see that, I've seen that over and over again. Even with organizations that have had severe layoffs, they're now realizing that they do have to require, they may have to recruit different types of people, which means building a reputation for a different sort of company. I can't tell you how many companies have come to me and said, well, we need to be, you know, we're competing against Google, you know, and Snapchat and Facebook for talent, and these are defense companies. And what do? Well, you got to change your reputation. Well, how do you measure that? Well, we have to, talk about how people perceive you as well as how people are talking about you. So that's the thing, that's the first big thing that I see. And what that means is that on dashboards and in the measurement reports that I'm doing, increasingly internal communications has a place on that dashboard. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's talent wars are kind of the first thing. The second one is the attention war. We have seen statistically, I have seen statistically over the last, oh God, I can't believe it, 30 years of measuring public relations and measuring media, that every 4 years, the amount of everybody's coverage goes down because the news hole and the attention span and everything else gets shifted away to the presidential election. Now, this also happens in times of crisis. It happens all over the place with online news. There's not a defined news hole as much, but it is going to be very hard to get people's attention, not the average people, but the news media's attention, the closer we get to the elections and frankly, the primary. I mean, we've gone from an occasional primary story on the news to entire channels devoted just to the whole channel of New Hampshire Public Radio devoted entirely just to primary stuff. So that's going to suck attention away. Traditional media is going to lose ground to all the other screens. Podcasts are what everybody's watching. YouTube is what everybody's watching. It's interesting. I attempted to cut the cord on my cable last summer, whenever it was. Semi-succeeded, but it was very frustrating and very difficult. 6 months later, it's a lot easier. All the channels now are just expecting you to be watching things in other forms, and I don't think we necessarily think about that. That where we typically place our messages is not where anybody's paying any attention anymore. So other devices, particularly mobile, are going to, is where people are going to look for things, and if you're not there, you won't be seen. And other forms of new media, things like Periscope and Snapchat and WhatsApp and all those other things, they are going to be, if you're trying to recruit people under the age of 40, that's probably where they're going to be. And then what I call content fatigue and blocking apps. I mean, the reality is we're all sick of too many emails. We're all sick of too much stuff. And some solutions are there. One are these blocking apps that basically block not just pop-ups and ads, but they can clean out your emails. They can make sure you don't see any particular types of ads. This is a hot new industry of these blocking apps, which means that paid media is going to be less and less effective. And to a certain extent, some of the content marketing piece of public relations is going to be less effective because people just won't pay any more attention because there's just too much content out there. And they're already talking about quote-unquote peak content where there has just been so much content produced that nobody can ever watch all of it, and people are starting to ignore it. And every single day there's 10 stories about how to make your content compelling and irresistible, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reason why everybody needs to know that is because it's just not as hard to break through anymore. So silos. Let's talk about the silos that have existed and still exist in public relations and make us all crazy. But internal and external, right? It's silly, the concept, because your employees are getting as much information from social media and from their friends and from all these other sources as they are from anything internal. So the whole premise of quote-unquote internal communications is kind of an odd thing where, yeah, it's charged with talking to employees, but it's probably the second or third or fourth most important source of information for employees. Employees still say that the number one source is their managers, but I think if you put it in bigger content, it's probably, the outside world and whoever influences them on, in media and on the soccer fields and in schools and everything else. So there's less of a barrier there. Journalists are journalists. The whole barrier between social media and traditional media is kind of a myth now. If who was I saying? So if Bob Garfield is on the media, which is a radio show, well, he's also all over Twitter. He's also done a podcast. I mean, there's all these other ways you hear him. And so what do you call it? A traditional media? NPR is about as traditional as it gets, except for the fact that he's everywhere else. So, I mean, it's kind of, those barriers are very porous, and content is content. So increasingly, measurement is going to have to focus on not what you've done in the media, but what are your stakeholders doing with your information when you get it? Are they responding? Are they engaging? And what that means for measurement is that rather than the traditional media tracking, sure, you need to monitor the media to make sure nothing's blowing up on you, but in terms of measurement, it's much more about A/B testing. I put this content out there. Did I get engagement from it? Did I get more engagement from this content than from that content? So it's much more about testing what is more effective at getting engagement, for example, than it is, did I get more positive or negative coverage, or how many impressions did I make? That's another one. I didn't even put that in there, but the whole concept of impressions, I think 2016, certainly 2017 might be the year that impressions go away. Not entirely, but I had a very interesting conversation with a very major TV network, and was making my argument against impressions, and the guy said, "You're not getting any argument from me. My argument is with higher ups that still think impressions are important, but we know that a small obscure blog will generate more engagement and more views and more downloads for us than the LA Times will, and I need the evidence to prove that." So that's where measurement's going in terms of that. And so in order to do that kind of thing, in order to say, okay, this piece of content which we worked with this podcast guy on and appeared here, and our measure of success was engagement. Yes, count impressions if you really care, but it was 5,000 potential views in social media, but 10,000 engagements in terms of retweets and sharing and everything else. And oh, by the way, that generated this many more online views. Well, that all has to be in a very different kind of dashboard than the ones that we've talked about. Traditionally, dashboards have been generated by, whether it's Fission or Meltwater or whoever, they've reflected PR and maybe some social media. Now they've got to reflect PR and social media and Google Analytics and your social analytics and your sharing. Your number of shares, your number of sessions, all of those things have to be in one place. What that means is that the old vendors are not going to be up to the task. New vendors are coming along, and some existing vendors have changed enough so that they can cope. I mean, CyberAlert is the example of, now incorporating Google Analytics and social analytics in every media dashboard it offers. But that's the kind of change technology is going to see. And then speaking of technology, data is everywhere, as we know. Leadership loves it and expects you to put it to use. It's not, there's an expectation now. Oh, well, we've got lots of data. Go figure this out or go figure that out. So it's not hard to get your hands on data. What is really hard to do is getting insight from that data and making it meaningful. And I will see if I can disguise this conversation I just had, but an organization I work with does a phenomenal amount of assessment. And they work with 3,500 different projects, and they assess each one of those things and do a baseline assessment on 7 different categories. Each one requires, let's say, 10 different checkpoints. All of this data has been collected in individual Excel files. And I was brought in to assess it and to say, is this meaningful? And I was really struggling with being polite, and they finally just said, are you telling me that the things that we promise that we do, things like efficiency and effectiveness, do not have any relationship to all of those metrics we're collecting? And I said, yeah. I said, there's no way that you can correlate or prove that all of those 256 metrics that you count improve effectiveness 1 iota the way you're doing it now. Now, I'm very grateful that they paid me to do that. It is a very sad statement on a tremendous amount of wasted effort, but that's what you're going to see a lot of in 2016 is people collecting data that really isn't going to help them much, and you're really going to need the insight and the ability to understand how to get some aha moments out of it. Which means that, and I'm already seeing it, the PR companies and PR departments are hiring analysts and data miners, not PR people. And as a result, if you have some data analytics and data miners in there, you can then say, okay, we've got this assessment. We know we did these 10 things for these 5 projects. Now, let's rank order the impact of all of those different things, and you have a consistent impact score, and say, okay, now we can tell which ones performed better or which ones didn't. That's what cost effectiveness and efficiency is going to show, and this is going to sort of replace the concept of, oh, I need to show ROI. Standards are here. I will continue to yell at people who say that they don't exist. I have in my hand the results of the validation of the social media measurement standards. The Media Ratings Council, if you don't know what that is, it's a body that was chartered by Congress to ensure that the television networks accurately reported viewership and ratings and things like that. So that's what it was started to do, and it has since established standards for reporting just about everything having to do with the media. And it is supported by the Procter & Gamble's and Coca-Cola's and the major media buying companies, and works with the Interactive Advertising Bureau and the 4As and all of these different organizations. And they have come out with these standards. And they have the ability, because they're very tightly connected to the clients, to the buyers of media space. And media, they're basically telling the media buyers, no, you can't, the media companies, you can't do this because we won't pay for it. So their standards are going to have a ripple effect that really is going to be felt, I think, in 2016. And I think that people are looking for standards. I think people are tired of trying to make up their own stuff and really want some standard best practices, and they do exist. And as I said, we're validating the social media ones. The PR ones continue to be refined, but they exist. And actually, there's a new set of standards coming out for internal communications measurement as well. So there will be more on the standards front. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Erin, who will moderate the questions, and we'll all try to come up with some answers.
All right. Thanks, Katie. And as you can see on the slide, you can either say the questions if you're calling in to today's teleconference, or you can use the chat box and just type in your question, and I'll be happy to ask Katie. So let's get started. All right, the first question we have, Katie, is, can you recommend any conferences I should attend this year?
Of course, the Measurement Summit. We do host the Measurement Summit, and it is different from most conferences because it is case studies and sort of a lot of networking and discussion about measurement at a fairly high level. It happens in October. And of course, I have to recommend that. The PR News measurement conferences, they do one in Chicago in the fall and one in Washington in the spring, consistently get good reviews. As a speaker on the PR News measurement thing, and a sponsor of them, I mean, I like those too. It is a full day. You will probably hear 30 different measurement experts in the course of the day. It is a tremendous amount of information, but they get terrific reviews, and people seem to love them. So those are, like, in terms of measurement conferences. However, what I would also recommend you do is touch base with a local PR, like PRSA or IABC, because frankly, they're the ones that are doing the more intensive 2-3 hour measurement workshops that are really, frankly, more useful. I've done them now, and I'm doing one in Boston. It's more of a conversation. I've done them in Minneapolis and wherever. Anyway, lots of different places that I can't remember where I was these days. But frankly, if you can find one where it's a 2 or 3 hour workshop and hands-on, where the presenter has to kind of solve your particular problem, that's going to be, oh, I know what it was the IABC one in Calgary last fall. And I did an overview, but then we did 3 hours of, okay, what is your measurement problem? This is how we're going to solve it. Here's how you analyze this. Here's how you do this. And it's much more hands-on. So it kind of depends what you want. But your local IABC and PRSA chapters might have more intensive workshop kind of things. Just trying to think if there's any other big measurement conference that I can think of. But, and there's one out there that's escaping me. Oh, I know. So there's another thing that is related more on the PR research thing, and that's the Institute for Public Relations, the International Public Relations Research Conference in March in Miami. And I specifically recommend, not necessarily recommend this, but I bring it up for the Air Force folks here because every single year there are amazing research presentations by public affairs folks. And it's one of the reasons I keep going back is just to listen to the folks from the Air Force and the Navy and all of these different groups that really do some amazing research projects. So if you're really interested in PR research, it's really, Erin, you just made my reservation. How much is it? It's like $400?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not an outrageously expensive conference. It's in Miami in March, which is kind of a nice place to be. And it's roughly 120 public relations researchers and practitioners. There are 108 total sessions in 3 days. So if you're curious about pretty much anything, you can find somebody to talk to about.
Awesome. And let's move on to another question that was submitted. It is, not all of our activity is part of a campaign, and our specific campaign objectives are not yet well defined. Should we design a daily dashboard, or must we limit our measurement only to campaigns?
No, I actually would say forget the campaign dashboard. The campaign dashboard will come out of a daily dashboard. If you think about it this way, first of all, if you ever want to do correlations, you need more data rather than less. I'm a big fan of tracking daily stuff anyway, because if you're tracking everything daily, you can always aggregate it up to weekly or monthly. You can also identify by date the campaign impact of the dashboard simply by date. So campaigns are fine to measure, and I generally recommend measuring a campaign as a pilot project if you want to get measurements going. Some important campaign is always a good thing to measure. But in terms of usefulness, I think you need a daily dashboard so you understand what's going on. My favorite one is, if you're only looking at a campaign and, the first day you've got, oh my God, I've got 300 engagements and 47 million impressions and half the world saw my stuff. Well, you don't know whether those are good numbers or bad numbers, or if it's the prices. Oh my God, it's prices. I've got, 37 negative articles. Well, if you look back over on a daily basis and realize, well, that's kind of average, then go have another cup of coffee and take a nap. You don't have prices on your hands. So a daily dashboard keeps things in perspective. It lets you know, and it's also really hard to start things up, to get a measurement dashboard going takes a while, and you don't want to do it in the middle of a crisis or, when suddenly somebody comes down and decides that you have to do this. So what you want to do is you want to have a regular, ongoing daily dashboard, and then aggregate that into reports on campaigns or initiatives or crises or whatever.
Great. And if I could just jump in with the follow-on question, and what would be some of the metrics that would be included on that daily dashboard?
Well, that's a good question. So in terms of what you want to look for in terms of metrics are actionable metrics, right? So what are you going to do something about? And again, it goes back to your goals and objectives and stuff. But let's just say you're tracking your messages, right? And so every day you know that of the 100 stories in key publications that mention the Air Force, 5% on average contain a key message. What you want to know is, how much above or below that norm is it? And it's not that you really need to know that every day. What you need to know is if you see it going down over 10 days, or you see negative messages going up, that's what you want to be tracking, is what matters to the success of your program. And God knows in the military, it's not just coverage, it's coverage that contains your messages. Because you have, I don't know if you know, but I love NATO because they have the challenge of, nobody quite understands them or wants to support them, but that's how they get their money. So their definition of positive, negative, positive is stories that leave people less likely to oppose NATO. And negative is, negative is the story leaves you more likely to oppose NATO. And what they really hope for is a story that is neutral but contains NATO's key messages. And so that's what they track every day. And they don't do it for every single publication on the planet. They do it for a select group of key influential media outlets in, NATO countries. And they track that every day. And then at the end of, whenever the boss wants it, they can generate it. I think it's monthly. They generate a report that says, okay, on average, we got more messages out there this month, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that is good about that is that when people know what metrics you're tracking, they tend to do more of those things. So if you track messages every day, people will think, oh, well, I really need to get my messages out there. If you track quantity alone, then people are going to go, well, I just need to get more coverage out there, which isn't necessarily very useful. If you track sentiment based on, am I getting more supportive articles out there, more desirable articles out there, people will start to think about, well, wait a minute, a positive article isn't one that says, I really love those Air Force uniforms. It's one that says, I really support the Air Force because, they're important to the future of America. Not that I know what your key messages are, but I'm making these things up. But if that's what you want to get out there, you want to measure that every day so that people will be cognizant that that's what you're doing. That's what you're measuring. That's what people will do more of. You become what you measure.
Okay, that's helpful. And the likely to oppose or not oppose is a helpful example. We really struggle because we don't have a lot of quantitative data in terms of whether our profit is going up since we don't sell anything, or customers or anything like that. So are there a couple other examples you can give for this nonprofit or government sector?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the lots. But so for example, my favorite one in terms of you become what you measure. We were working with a nonprofit association as the Plastic Surgeons Association, and yes, their members sell stuff, but they don't. And what they sell basically is the message that when you get plastic surgery, you really need to have a board-certified plastic surgeon. And there are times when that's very easy to get across when some, plastic surgeon screws up and messes up somebody's face. But on a day-to-day basis, they kind of rely upon their members to get out there and spread that message in, a variety of different ways. First report we did for them, we identified, I think it was a quarterly report, and we identified 350 different spokespeople had been quoted in the media about, for them, on their behalf, in the course of a quarter. None of which were on message, right? They were just talking about anything they wanted to talk about. Next big membership board meeting, they said, this is what we're tracking. One of our key metrics is percentage of stories that contains key messages, and we're looking at that by spokesperson. So we're tracking the spokespeople, and we're tracking whether you communicate a key message. Next quarter, there were about 100 quotes, 100 different spokespeople, and 60% of them contained a key message. So all you had to do was tell people that's what you were measuring, and the entire behavior and the entire message and program changed. So think about what gets you to, either support in key congressional districts or, more qualified recruits or less protests or whatever, and you'll do more of it if that's what you're measuring. And so what your measures do is say, okay, I get more of this kind of story out there if I do X, Y, and Z. So you track the activities, and then you track what the content is. And, you start to make those connections, and you just do more of the stuff that gets your messages out there. Think about what this, I have lots of nonprofit stuff, but think about what the other example is you do you guys have access to your Google Analytics or website stuff?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. We have a main platform, and so it does have a back end for the data analysis.
But you can get access to your web traffic data.
Yes.
Traffic at least traffic to the public affairs section. Because what would be interesting would be to track that against your daily coverage and see what generates people to click. What makes people click and what gets people engaged. At least from a recruitment standpoint, that might be an interesting thing. So the idea with the dashboard is you're cross-tabbing two different data points. So you're going to, or two or three, but you're keeping track of some aspect of the content of your media coverage that you think is going to help you achieve your goals, and then you to double check that and say, well, if one of the goals is support in general, is clicking on the website, or at least going for more information, some form of engagement, retweeting, sharing information. If that is a sign of engagement, then let's start tracking that against these desirable stories and see which ones generate more engagement.
And then in your book, you talked a little bit about how awareness isn't sufficient in objective.
Well, and awareness is, yeah, go ahead. Finish your question, I guess.
No, go ahead. I mean, because our again, kind of going back to the audience's thing, we have a hard time pinpointing what exactly we want people to do. We just need them to know about us, and so getting to more specific or measurable than awareness is challenging.
Well, and DEI, and I mean, it's you know, for the Air Force, it's like, it's not that anybody isn't aware of the Air Force. What you may not be aware of is that, you know, the Air Force is a great place for women, for example. And you want to change people's opinions on that. You know, it's not hard to do. It's just a question of can you do it, and can you do it more, you know, frequently enough to be meaningful.
So that example, what would we measure in web analytics and social media to measure whether people think the Air Force is a good place for women?
Well, in web analytics, what you would look for would be what you would probably do, and I haven't actually looked at your website for this particular thing, but is there anything on your website that says, you know, anything about women in the Air Force?
Well, there's lots of information about, you know, the women in combat decision that's recent, but I don't think there's a specific campaign for it at the moment.
It might be interesting just to see, you know, how many people clicked on that. In social media, it's easier. I don't know what you're doing for social listening, but that's a little bit easier because most social platforms guess, and I'm not sure they're accurate, but they will at least guess at gender. Google guesses at gender too. Like I said, I'm not quite sure how accurate it is, but you could certainly look at, you know, ratio of female to male comments and female to male positive comments or neutral comments opposed to negative comments. But the other thing you can do is, and I know you used to have restrictions about it. Can you survey the general populace?
We can. There are still, you know, regulations that limit those things, guidelines, if you will, but the opportunity exists.
Because I will tell you that I just used Surveyta, which is a platform out there that is incredibly simple. I have to say, it makes SurveyMonkey look like passing your PhD at MIT. You basically, for $1 a respondent, keep your survey question short. You know, you basically, I think you're limited to 6 questions plus a qualifier. And you can do, you know, a representative sample of America is 500 people. You can do 500 surveys for $500. Or 500 responses for $500. So that's cheap enough that you could do that once a quarter and see whether you move the needle on awareness of a particular, you know, of a particular message or a particular concept or a particular campaign. And like I said, I don't know if there's restrictions about that. I just did that for a nonprofit, and basically it was around the whole issue of premature birth and did anybody know about these things. And it took all of, you know, it took me about 20 minutes to write the questions. It took me about 20 minutes to start the survey, and, you know, it cost $250. Multi-million-dollar law. Say what?
Sorry, background noise.
Oh, so I mean, the answer is if you could use Surveyta, it is a very quick and easy way of getting information. as opposed to doing, longer, more complicated surveys. And I know you do some surveys. I just don't know what the restrictions would be on that. But it's a very, I'm now a very big fan of it, just because it got the client. The client had no budget. Their entire survey research budget was $750, and I, got them the information they needed. It's Survada, S-U-R-V-A-D, S-U-R-V-A-T-A. Survada. If you made it, survey data, I guess, is really where it came from.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
Yeah. And if you want to know where the source is, and basically, if you've opened a website for a media publication, and it says, if you want to read this content, will you answer a few survey questions? That's where that's the kind of survey it is. But you can specify. I mean, I wanted women between the ages of 24 and 35, and that's all. And they had to be aware of, or familiar with, or touched by the issue of premature birth. And so that's the screening question. And then I got 250 people who were, in fact, the right age and the right awareness.
Is there any other way that we can specify awareness? We're trying to just...
No, I mean, here is the reality. What you can, we just had someplace in my, maybe Erin can make a note and I'll remind me to send it to you. The Institute for PR Measurement Commission had a lengthy debate on the subject of, is engagement equal to awareness? And the answer from the academic and research side of things is that no, because lots of people engage on things and then forget them 2 seconds later. So just because I click on a post from the Air Force about something does not necessarily mean that I am aware of it. What it means is that I physically did something in response to it, so I saw it. And the question is, why did I like it? It might be because I really liked the person. This is actually, student research has shown that one of the reasons that people click on and like things is because they want to sleep with the person that sent it to them. They want to impress. That's a crude way of saying it. They want to impress the person or be closer to the person that sent it to them, and therefore they like them, even though they don't care. So engagement isn't really a measure of awareness. It is a measure of, I have seen it. I've been touched by it. But it doesn't necessarily mean you'll remember anything later.
So what would
the best way to do it is
remember
or
recognize?
Excuse me?
I'm trying to dig down to what would be the next level. So if awareness is too vague and too meaningless, too shallow, so the next level would be people recognize or people understand?
Well, but you see, the question is, what do you want them to be aware of? Because if it's a campaign or an issue, give me an example of something in the past.
Well, see, and that's part of our challenge right now is we have the strategic plan for our military service, of course, but we're just now developing the strategic communications plan. So right now, the broad objectives are that people are aware of what the military strategy is. And it's just very broad. I mean, that people understand why we have an Air Force and people. So, and we know we need to dig down deeper into it. But what we're struggling with on this measurement project is, are we, given that we're doing this backwards and trying to come up with metrics before we finish defining our objectives, is there anything we can measure in the meantime while we refine those objectives?
Yeah, hang on 2 seconds. Let me just see. I wonder if I've Because I did have an example of, no, that's all I did. What you would then look for is awareness of, right? So you would look for Air Force and women, for example, or Air Force and innovation, or any of the various ways that Air Force come up. Basically, you would look for association of certain words and phrases with the positioning that the Air Force is looking for. I mean, I know that if it's about innovation and recruitment, and I want to get the best and the brightest, then you would look for words associated with those things. And the whole linguistics, natural language processing technology is getting better that way. I mean, it is a lot easier to look for Air Force and a particular concept or something, innovation.
And then would it be a qualitative measure, just sort of a sentiment?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
It would be does it's like what I would call a message, right? So if the message is the Air Force is the place to, is the military service that you want to go if you want to explore space. Okay, and space would be the one. And so you would then say, okay, what percentage of the stories out there mention the Air Force and space, or space technology, or space travel, or space exploration, or future astronauts, or any of those things? You would put qualifiers in there to say, let's invent words, not invent, but let's select words that convey this strategy idea that we have here, and track and see what percentage of all the coverage contains them. And it's going to be 1%. But if it goes from 1% to 2%, that's a 100% increase, and you've done something.
And now, is that the kind of thing that you would track daily on a dashboard?
Yep. Well, you'd want to track it daily. So, you'd aggregate it up at the end of the month, but you would want to track it daily to know what. So, for instance, if you put a female pilot, or if a female pilot gets interviewed, and that interview gets picked up and spread around, and there's a big spike for the message around space, you want to know that. And that's going to happen randomly on any given day. So, yeah, you would want that in your daily, and then you would report it in the aggregate at the end of the month. I mean, so here's the thing. I mean, the Navy woman that got picked up by Iran, I was like, that fascinated me. I was like, what do you mean there was a woman on a ship in Iran? I mean, and what role did she play and whatever. So that's the kind of random thing that happens in the military all the time that you want to know, okay, so what's the social media world, what's the world saying about women in the Navy as a result of that? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Okay. We have another question?
Yep, and since it's 12:55, I think this will be our final question for today. Let's see. The question is, could you give an example where you can clearly see the difference between reach and opportunities to see/impressions? Did you get that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, there is a certain cable network that we work with, and we had a very interesting conversation with them about their goals and objectives, and I was trying to tell them that engagement really mattered, and reach didn't. And they said, well, so I said, if you get a lot of engagement around this particular television program, isn't that good? And she said, no, not if it's geezers. We only care about the 18 to 35 audience because that's what we have to deliver to our advertisers. Therefore, quantitatively, we don't count the rest. We only count the 18 to 35. And they get that information from ComScore, and that is reach, right? Have they reached 18 to 35-year-olds with their PR messages? Impressions would report, well, I got 37 billion impressions, but nobody cares. Actually, Raytheon is another one. Raytheon, I went in there and they said, there's only 100 people on the planet that can legally buy my product. I don't care about impressions. I care about reach. I only want to reach people who read these particular publications. So while we literally stopped tracking impressions and only tracked reach into the specific publications of the people who are likely to consider, buying a missile system. And I had another example there too. Raytheon was a good one. Well, I mean, anything where you only, if you are selling a product that is primarily of interest to mothers, right? So you want to report reach in terms of the coverage out there, what percentage reached mothers as opposed to something else. Now that information is available through ComScore, through Nielsen, through services like that. It's not necessarily going to come out of your, Cision or Meltwater report, but that is the difference.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie.
Does that answer the question?
It does, from my perspective. The question was typed in, so they can always.
Mariana? And then Phil, I see your note, and I think what we'll do is send that link out. Thank you, and let's thank Phil for helping us with GoToMeeting and sponsoring our GoToMeeting connection here. And we'll send that link out when we send out the copy of the slides.
And Mariana says, thanks from Argentina. So yes, Katie,
You're welcome.
You successfully answered the question.
Excellent. And I love Argentina. It was so much fun. Invite me back. Actually, I'll get relatively close this summer because I'm going to Rio for the Olympics to see my cousin win the Olympics. So that's my summer goal.
All righty. Well, everyone, thank you so much for attending, and we will be sending out the slide deck and the information for next month's measurement hour later today. So enjoy the rest of your week.
And wait, before you go, here's a question for you, because the next measurement advisor will be about politics and public affairs. So I asked as well I hope the Air Force folks are still here.
We're still here.
All of that. Yeah, good. So it's all about measuring public affairs, and so a lot of politics in there too, because I'm from New Hampshire and I can't help myself. And then, so that's one topic, and then the other, it's really more of a how-to. And then the other topic was going to be about measuring relationships, and either send me a note or add to the chat or whatever. Tell me what your preferences would be, because we haven't made up our mind what next month is going to be about. It'll be one of the two of them. So give us some feedback.
Okay, we will.
Thank you.
All right. Should we call it a day? Or not a day, but...
No. Call it an hour.
Call it an hour.
Thanks, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate it.
Yep. See you
Thank
next
you.
time. Ta-ta.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.